Hey there. Hey there, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday live stream. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. I write the Illinoize.com, the political newsletter that kind of cuts through the noise of politics and politicians and holds some of them accountable for what's going on here in Illinois and what we're facing in this state. And obviously, there's a ton of controversial topics that continue to permeate around the state. As we're under 6 weeks from election day now, it's a hot environment. Hot topics are out there, and people are sensitive and are definitely on edge on both sides of the aisle. But and I think that's led to some people taking some liberties, and we'll talk a little bit about those things as we move on this afternoon. But I wanted to start this afternoon with the ongoing discussion about the new criminal justice reform law, the Safety Act, as it's called, the end of cash bail in the state that we've been talking a lot about over the last few weeks. The idea is that that proponents don't want defendants to be held on nonviolent, non-threatening crimes because they simply can't pay bond. The question ongoing is, one, does that even apply anymore after changes to the way bond was done a few years ago? And two, is the law written in a way that it actually continues to allow criminals, defendants, to be held when they are accused of a crime or are a threat to people or the community at large? It's an ongoing discussion. It's an ongoing battle. We are going to bring in State Representative Patrick Windhorst this afternoon. Representative, we've got a little noise on your end. I don't know if you've got some background or what on.
Maybe background. Can you hear me all right?
We do hear you. There's some noise, but we'll make it work. Okay. Representative Windhorst from Metropolis, way down along the Ohio River. Yes. I've spent some time down there working congressional races in the past. Beautiful place. Representative Windhorst is a former state's attorney in Massac County, down in the southern part of the state. So he's someone that's been involved in the criminal justice process, in a big part of his life. So, Representative, I want to start here because I feel like whether you support cash bail or elimination of cash bail or wherever you are on this, has the rhetoric been too much here that, this is going to be like the horror movie, The Purge, where crime is legal and people are going to be killed and maimed and, criminals are not going to be held responsible for anything anymore? Has the rhetoric been a little too far in all of this?
Well, I'd like to, being a lawyer, like to drill down into what the law is and try to use my experience and what I see as the experience of other areas to try to determine what it's going to mean for us in Illinois when we make these reforms. Now, I was state's attorney when the prior Bail Reform Act was put into law in 2017 and was implemented in 2018. And of course, I had some concerns about that implementation. And then what we're going to see come January 1st is an even broader bail reform than we saw 5 years ago. So I think what we hear from people on my side of the aisle who are concerned about public safety is that there's a lot of uncertainty about what this law is going to do once it's fully implemented. Some of the provisions, particularly the elimination of cash bail completely, have not really been tried on the state level that we can point to. The proponents make comparisons to the federal system or a juvenile court system, but not the more broader system that a state criminal justice system would have. So I think that's where the rhetoric comes from, is concern about what it could mean if we see some of the potential worst case scenarios. But I do think, and maybe more to your point, that it's important to try to examine the law and get a feel for what this will mean in practice by talking to those in law enforcement, attorneys in the criminal justice system, advocates, to see what their opinion is on what this will mean.
I think even the most, honest Democrat would tell you that the way the law is written, there are a few problems in it, mostly in the categorization of what's a threat to an individual person or to a community at large. Conversations are underway, though, and we saw Senator Bennett introduce a bill this week that starts to implement some of those changes. Are you confident in these discussions and in what states' attorneys are talking to the House about that this can be cleaned up and fixed over the next, what do we have, 2-3 months before this takes effect?
Well, we will have an opportunity after the election during the lame duck session to potentially address these issues. Hopefully we take that opportunity and make changes that are necessary. I have advocated, in fact, filed a bill to repeal the Safety Act, except for a couple provisions. I believe that we should take a fresh look at what was done with the Safety Act, but I also understand that prior to January, my party is going to be in the super minority, so the likelihood of that bill being heard and voted on is not very good. So we have to look at what we have in front of us. As to Senator Bennett's bill, I think it is a significant improvement on the Safety Act's elimination of cash bail. It eliminates a lot of the ambiguities on what is detainable and not detainable. And I'm using the word ambiguity kind of charitably. I don't really think that's the case. I think it's pretty clear there are certain offenses that are not detainable or rarely detainable under the way the law is written and passed by the General Assembly. So I think that bill would allow for more offenses that would be considered violent or dangerous felonies to be detainable, and would eliminate some of those concerns. And we'll just see if that is able to get further discussion.
You and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and I had the story in the newsletter about what it would take for Republicans to get on board with the idea of ending cash bail. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, or it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but clearly Democrats are in the supermajority in both the House and the Senate. They have the governor's office. They appear committed to ending cash bail. So that's going to happen. But it's how it's done. What would it take for Republicans to get on board with a change to this bill that would make it acceptable to you all moving forward after January 1st?
I think for a lot of us, it's having a seat at the table for these discussions. We have not been invited or involved in any of the discussions with the original Safety Act or any of the trailer bills that have been voted on, and 3 have passed the House, 2 have passed the Senate. And we're also not included in the current working group that is meeting and discussing possible changes. So I think for us, before we start throwing out our ideas in the public, we would like to be invited to the discussions that are occurring and provide input there, which I think is the most appropriate way for this to occur. I myself personally have reached out to proponents and offered to meet, discuss, talk about possible changes. I can't say that I've not received any response, but it's been very limited response, and I've not been included in any of the meetings. In fact, I think about all we were included with in the original Safety Act was we had some subject matter hearings and committee hearings on the subject matter of criminal justice reform in the Judiciary Criminal Committee. But once the bill was, the amendment passed the Senate and came to the House, there was no further committee hearings and no further opportunity for us to vet those issues that were presented in the bill. And of course, since then, it's been the only response has been trailer bills, which again, we have not been invited to that discussion.
But what specifically? Is it more discretion for judges? Is it a clear line of what is and isn't detainable, or or should be detainable? What specifically could ease your concerns as to what's in this bill?
Well, in my conversations with state's attorneys, what they have said is if we are going to eliminate cash bail, and many of the state's attorneys support eliminating cash bail, they would prefer the judges to have more discretion on what offenses are detainable, basically a true case-by-case basis, rather than having categories which are detainable and those outside those categories are not detainable, and basically use either public safety and or flight risk category broadly to determine, for a judge to determine who can be detained prior to trial. I think that would be a good starting point for us to discuss. I think the state's attorneys are the ones that will be attempting to implement this beginning January 1st. I would note that prior to the passage of the Safety Act, the pretrial commission from the Supreme Court, the commission that was advising the Supreme Court on pretrial practices, did not recommend completely eliminating cash bail because of the readiness of the judicial system throughout the state to tackle that. They favored a more gradual approach and implementation. So as a conservative, I favor more gradual approaches to changes in the law versus large sweeping changes. Large sweeping changes are make it harder to correct mistakes that occur. So I would have preferred something that was more gradual. Again, my desires, though, however, were not the ones that carried the day.
So in Senator Bennett's bill, which is kind of the first overture we've seen from Democrats, and Scott Bennett from Champaign is a moderate Democrat who is a former assistant state's attorney in Champaign County. So he's been involved in the system as well. The bill continues to eliminate cash bail, but it states that clearly a defendant can be labeled a flight risk if they have previous non-appearances in court. Would make the cash bail law applicable beginning January 1, 2023, meaning current cases, pending cases, would continue to fall under the current system. Would allow a judge to hold a defendant if charged with a forcible felony, if the defendant is eligible for a prison sentence, and clarifies multiple definitions for holding a defendant, eliminates provisions for a specific person, which has been brought up in some of the concerns for the bill, and makes can be held if they make threats to any person or the community. As you read that bill, as you read those provisions, are you comfortable with all of those things?
Well, I did note there was in that 110-6.1A section, which currently has a list of 7 categories for which a person can be detained pretrial. It adds an 8th, which is more of a catch-all and much broader than the current law. So I do favor that if we're going to eliminate cash bail entirely, that there needs to be a broader provision that allows a judge to consider or have more discretion in what they consider for detention. So that I thought was a positive. I also appreciated the fact that there were some issues with speedy trial time or time to bring the defendant to trial. It was corrected from 90 days to 120, which matches other aspects of Illinois law for speedy trial. So there were some positive corrections in the bill, in my opinion.
I do want to move on to ethics. You sit on the House Ethics Committee, and we've had another legislator, Senator Emil Jones III, indicted on bribery charges in the last couple of weeks, and we have another state senator, Mike Hastings, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, who's got some ethics issues and state funds being used in an investigation and settlement with an employee, as well as obviously issues of domestic violence, which fall outside of the purview of a legislator in ethics. But the Democrats are going to point to the fact that they passed an ethics reform bill earlier this year that tries to address some of the financial things and maybe even a revolving door provision. Did that go far enough to you?
Well, there were 2 things that really stood out to me where it did not go far enough. I don't know that it would have made a difference with Senator Jones or Senator Hastings, but I believe there needs to be a complete ban on legislators lobbying the state or local governments. Right now, the ban for local governments is more limited than I'd like to see it. I think it should be a complete ban. I don't believe the legislators should be lobbyists, as simple as that. And I also think that what we call the revolving door provision needs to be strengthened. There was a provision that prevents legislators from leaving the General Assembly and then becoming a lobbyist. They have to wait a 6-month period of time before they can become a lobbyist. However, there is a pretty big loophole in that provision that says if you leave before the end of the General Assembly, in essence, you just have to wait to the start of the next General Assembly, not the full 6 months. So you could have a scenario where someone waits to the final day before the next General Assembly resigns, and then in a day or two they can turn around and lobby, which would defeat the point of having a cooling off period or revolving door provision. I would prefer at least a 1-year hard provision that would not allow anyone to lobby the General Assembly let a legislator lobby the General Assembly for at least a year after they've left. And I think those two things really stick out from the prior bill that should have been included and really would strengthen it.
I don't have to tell you that there's not a lot of trust in politicians these days out there, whether it's Republican, Democrat, independent voters, etc., who think that you're all crooks, that you're all bad guys on the take. Even if you're not, there's clearly a negative reaction to who legislators are, who politicians are, and what they do. How do you improve that, whether you're in the minority or in the majority, or whether you're just Patrick Windhorst from Metropolis, Illinois? How do you improve the way people see politicians in this state?
Well, that's actually something I think about quite a bit. Building trust is a hard thing to do. It's easy to lose trust. It's hard to build it. So there are a couple things that I think we as legislators or statewide politicians should seek to do. Number one involves keeping your word. If you say something, do your best to make sure you keep it and that what you say is accurate. Admit when you made a mistake, admit when you're not correct, which happens. And we need to be honest about those things. I think being honest and being open with the public and transparent would go a long way toward building trust with the public towards state government. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And it's easy in politics to say, well, the other side's doing this, therefore I can do this, and it's acceptable because they're doing it. And of course, we know that just leads to a race to the bottom in our politics. And it's something we should avoid. We should look to move beyond. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard. I hope the public holds us to a higher standard. And I think if we can do those things, be transparent, open, honest, keep our word, and keep high standards, I think that will begin us down the road of building trust with the public.
Representative is a fellow guy with an Irish first name and German last name. I always appreciate where we come from on these things, and appreciate the good conversation, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. That's State Representative Patrick Windhorst joining us on the Illinoize live stream and podcast here on a Wednesday, and definitely interesting to hear his comments and whether Republicans can be open to the idea of eliminating cash bail at all. But let's continue the conversation and move more to the idea of ethics. All right, we move our conversation to corruption and ethics investigations and some of the maybe more sordid happenings in Springfield at the moment. We welcome Dan Mihalopoulos from WBEZ, Chicago Public Media, an investigative reporter there who's been on the case of Senator Mike Hastings, a previously quickly rising Democrat, was mentioned as a guy who would run for Secretary of State, now caught up in some cases about taxpayer dollars being used to pay a settlement against a former employee, allegations of abuse against his his estranged wife. Dan, where does this begin?
Okay, so Mike Hastings is a guy who comes from a political family, right, in the south suburbs. His father is a mayor in the south suburbs, and his trajectory, as you pointed out, was on the rise. You know, young guy, early 40s now, was one of the youngest state senators when he was elected back in 2012, with a sterling resume, military veteran, West Point graduate, athlete. When he was a student as well at the Division I level, and was rising through the ranks in Springfield since getting there as well. It was part of the leadership team until recently for the Senate Democrats, who are obviously in the majority there. And he also still is the chairman of the Energy and Public Utilities Committee, which obviously is very important on environmental issues and issues relating to the state regulated power companies like ComEd, which has been very much in the news the last few years. So everything was going pretty well for him until some allegations and accusations surfaced from various places, his office, his home, and a lobbyist with significant interests before his committee.
Let's start with the staff perspective here. So the state investigated and settled with a member of his legislative staff. We don't know a ton, I guess, in terms of details. What do we know about where that came from and why?
Oh no, we know a lot about it. I mean, there are reams of documents, inspector general reports, legal files, primarily in Cook County Circuit Court. And it was a woman who was his chief of staff named Cassandra Matz. And she is from the south suburbs also. She made a variety of accusations, essentially of discrimination, racial, gender, and other political discrimination, where she says that she was treated unfairly, that he reported her to the legislative inspector general to retaliate for her complaints. Long story short, though, the state was sued, the state Senate. Hastings was sued by Cassandra Matz. It was fought by the attorney general and by a private lawyer that was hired through the attorney general for Hastings. And at the end, they settled it. They paid $100,000 in total to Matz and her lawyer, and they spent close to $47,000 to bring in outside counsel who represented Hastings. So a total cost of nearly $150,000 without admitting any wrongdoing by Hastings or the state.
What's the pattern of this? I mean, is this something that happens often, that a legislator is sued or the Senate is sued in that regard, that as an institution or by an employee? This isn't, I mean, obviously I worked in the Senate for a year or so, back when Hastings first got there in early 2013, but it's not common that these sort of things happen, is it?
We don't know. We asked that of the attorney general, and we don't have a clear answer of whether something exactly like this has happened before and if it ended up the way that this case ended up. But we certainly don't know of any other cases precisely like this.
What's the situation with his wife?
Okay, so he filed for divorce last year, and he filed for divorce the day after she called the police to their home, said that they had a confrontation that was verbal in nature on that day back in April of 2021. But in the course of talking to the police in Frankfurt, she told them that she alleged that he had become physical with her on one occasion, essentially putting her in a headlock and slamming her head into a door, I think it was. And he denies this. He says that the police report should never have seen the light of day. but it got out over the summer. And that's really what set off the chain of events that led to him giving up his position in leadership. And now there are people calling for his resignation, among them a lobbyist named Jen Walling, who is one of the top environmental lobbyists in Springfield, who says that he bullied her, approached her in a menacing way, slammed his hands on the table, didn't do anything physical, according to Walling, but that she felt, like I said, bullied by him, and that she and people that work with her at the Illinois Environmental Council, she says, will not lobby him anymore, and they think that he should resign.
So I'll get to her in a moment, but
and the governor thinks so too. Yeah.
I'll get back to her in a moment. But the issue with his wife and the police report, what actions are different here? Because one, I don't know why he thinks a police report wouldn't be public, because they're always public. But two, the divorce records themselves, the case itself has been sealed, which is completely out of the norm, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, for me as an investigative reporter, it's very common to look at divorce files, not just because of allegations of abuse, but also we have many situations where we find out a lot of financial details that are relevant. And I could show you many, many stories that we have done based on divorce records that are public record. The issue here, though, is I went to Will County. I went to the courthouse in Joliet. I asked for that file. I searched by name. I had the case number. Nothing came up on the computer, and they refused to give us any documents. In fact, they said that they were impounded.
How is that? How is that possible? Did the judge seal it, and how could he do that while it's going on?
We don't know. We believe that Hastings requested that. That's what his spokesman, Ray Hanania, told us, that Hastings requested it because he felt that it would be used for political reasons against him. But actually, we filed a motion just recently in court. Chicago Public Media and WBEZ filed a motion in court to have that unsealed.
So we mentioned the issue with the lobbyist, Jen Walling, who we know a little bit, and you know, she's not a particularly menacing figure, you know, I mean, she's a petite, strong-willed, young lady, and he's not a small, guy. I mean, how, and yet his side came out and said she was doing the bullying. I've just been completely baffled by his response to everything in the course of this. Do you have any indication of what's going on here? Is this just damage control gone wrong? I'm just completely baffled by this.
Yeah, he hired a guy named Ray Hanania, who's been, he's a former Sun-Times reporter, and that's who's been coordinating his response. He didn't agree to be interviewed by us about any of these matters. But yeah, it was certainly an aggressive response. They said that she's the bully, but they didn't really offer any details. They produced some text messages where at times they had more genial interactions, Hastings and Jen Walling. Her response to that is, I had to deal with him because he's the chairman of the most important committee for environmental issues, and I'm an environmental lobbyist. And after she saw the accusations from his wife, she was concerned that she didn't want to be interviewed by him again. She had, by the way, text messages, contemporaneous text messages of her own, where she shared with me, where it showed that she had those concerns and shared them with other people at the time that those events happened over the last several years with Hastings.
So the governor has called on Hastings to resign, along with Emil Jones III, who was indicted on bribery charges. Where's Don Harmon in all this? This continues to be a pattern in the Senate Democrats, it seems, that and there never seems to be a call for any change. Tom Cullerton wasn't called on to resign or forced to resign. You can go back to Sandoval and Terry Link, etc. This seems to be a pattern among at least the Senate Democrats. And why aren't we hearing anything more from them?
Right. It was the governor who asked for the resignations last week of Hastings and Emil Jones III, who's a different situation, obviously being accused of corruption in federal court. But both of them were asked to resign by the governor, not by the Senate president, is my understanding. We've been trying to get a comment about Hastings from the office of the Senate president for weeks now, and it's very little that's coming from there. Almost nothing, as far as I can tell, on the record. I've read in other sources that that the Senate president and the Senate Democrats will not support Hastings' reelection. He's got a Republican opponent. I think you've analyzed it as thoroughly as anyone. I saw on your website that this Republican opponent in November is underfunded relative to Hastings, even without the Senate Democrats getting involved at this stage, at least. You have some discussion that it was the Senate president who requested and received the resignation from leadership of Hastings, but he's still a chairman of a Senate committee, and I don't see any response, at least not on the record anywhere, from the Senate president about this. And so, yeah, there are people wondering, where is the Senate president on this, and why is it the governor who has to make this call and not the Senate president?
Dan Mihalopoulos from WBEZ, Chicago Public Media. Dan, we appreciate the time as always. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right. Thanks to Dan Mihalopoulos from WBEZ, Chicago Public Media, great investigative reporter. Appreciate his time as he sat down with us to talk about the case involving Mike Hastings, which he's been digging into over the last few weeks. We're going to continue to follow elections and campaigns and what's going on here across the state over the final 6 weeks of the general election campaign. We're going to have a new story up here on the website shortly that subscribers got this morning on a new ad from Supreme Court candidate, Appellate Justice Mary Kay O'Brien, who's seemingly telling a lie about the abortion position of her opponent, who's incumbent Justice Mike Burke. They cited an interview and claimed that he said he agreed with the Dobbs decision, the Roe v. Wade decision, and supports ending the Roe case. And they cited an interview that he did on a public access kind of show a few weeks ago, and he never actually says what they allege that he said. So it's interesting, that they've been caught in this, and how they're going to backtrack it, and if they're going to get called out. Obviously, the PAC that's supporting Darren Bailey's campaign and against J.B. Pritzker has had a couple of ads pulled because of inaccurate information and in some cases complaints, I guess, because don't get me started on this, because it doesn't make a lot of sense why some ads were kept, and I understand why others weren't, but we're in a very tense situation, and I hope that we all can take a breath and remember that we are all human. And everybody is a person who has a family and people around them, and is trying their best, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. Whether you like J.B. Pritzker or hate J.B. Pritzker, I don't think he's out like actively trying to destroy the state, or you think Darren Bailey's trying to maim women in an alley somewhere. It's not that. That's not true. They're just people who see the future of the state very differently, and they're asking for who you agree with most. That's what it boils down to, and everybody just needs to take a little bit of a chill pill in between. Thanks so much for joining us. Continue to follow our stuff at theillinoize.com. You can sign up for our newsletter up in the top right corner. We've got stuff in your inbox every day, especially if you're a paid subscriber. We'd love to have you, and I hope you'll join us again next time here on the Illinoize for our live streaming podcast. Have a great day.